It's hard to describe how excited I am to be back here in Educational City. I haven't been back here since we finished the last building, that was Georgetown, about 5 years ago. And to come back and see Educational City working with the students, see, of course, the new buildings that you have been doing, it's a very special feeling. Probably you live here every day and you don't realize what you are doing here. I think it's a unique example in the world. I dare to say, to have this kind of top of the line facilities together and this kind of architecture, it's a very important example that is sending a message about the importance of education in the world. I thank you very much for inviting me also for this participation. Thank you for Amina, for Sheikha, for all the Qatar Foundation team to organizing this conference. For us, when we started working here in Qatar, it was like a reflection on going back. When we start to do the research of what Islamic architecture was, we began to look that, well, as you know, the Islamic culture got into the North Africa and to Spain. Then to Spain, it went to Mexico and to Latin America. So working here was almost like going back from Mexico again to Qatar. So we began to look at the values that we think the Islamic architecture has. And I talk values that because more than forms, I think we should really learn from what Islamic architecture is about and not so much about copying the exact forms. So I put together some of the images that we thought that were important for Islamic architecture. One was that it's an inward architecture. It's an architecture that lives to the inside, as you can see here in these buildings in Cairo and in Cordoba in Spain. And you see those examples that went through Latin America. For example, this is a ruin of a convent in Guatemala, also living to the inside. And how we began to find that also in our architecture, we have done projects living to the inside, like this headquarters or a hotel we did in Mexico City. Again, the idea of using walls and solid elements. So it's this idea that it's a massive architecture. A lot has to do with protecting from the climate, like these beautiful volumes in the Alhambra in Spain. You see that idea of walls also in many of the convents and haciendas in Mexico, also because of the climate, of the culture. And how we in the office, we try to do an architecture that is contemporary, but at the same time is based on walls, on geometric forms. These are a couple of houses we did, or a factory in the north of Mexico that has a very similar climate to the one you have here in Qatar, and playing with walls and also trying to have an architecture living to the interiors. Of course, living to the interiors, as you know, it means to be around courtyards. I mean, we are, every time we can, we want to go back to the Alhambra in Granada. I mean, we think it's one of the most magnificent places in the world. And you find these opportunities of using courtyards. We used courtyards in many places in colonial in Mexico. For example, this is a beautiful building in Guadalajara that you see the plan in the center, that it's a building all full of courtyards of different sizes, large, small, and all are connected with porticos, and how that comes directly from the Islamic tradition. Other examples that are courtyards in Mexico that could be in the Islamic world. And again, how we can use those courtyards and translate them into contemporary programs and contemporary life. This is a hotel that the office did in Mexico City that is also all around courtyards. Or, for example, a university that we work in Mexico, playing with color, with contemporary programs, but again, this idea of having courtyards as a basis of design. A house we did in the south of Spain that has this idea of having the major living spaces because of the climate. When you have shade, when you have cross ventilation, you can really live towards interior spaces. The use of porticos and open arcades that you see in all the Islamic tradition, and how we use them also in modern buildings. Again, you see them in the Alhambra, you see them in a convent in Mexico, and then in an office building that we did. And a lot of this is not that we intentionally copied, but it's like we have them unconsciously. And working in Qatar, I mean, made us conscious of a lot of these elements that we We thought we were very original, and at the end we find out that we were coming from the Islamic tradition we have. The idea of repeating a series of different elements like arches or colonnades. The one in the right is a church in Puebla in Mexico and could be completely Islamic. And how we did that in a cathedral in Managua. The use of different types of roofs, of domes, again in the Blue Mosque in Turkey or the cathedral that we did. The idea of also having the contrast of an horizontal architecture with vertical elements. We are always fascinated with the minarets that you see in the Islamic culture. The one in the center is an hacienda in Mexico where they use these cone shapes to store all the grains. And then in the right is an auditorium and a water tank that we did in a factory in Mexico, trying to follow the same shapes of making sculptural elements. The use of towers, for example, that you see in traditional architecture, like in Morocco, and how we incorporate them in the university, American University in Cairo, or in another building we did in Dallas. The other thing I think that it's a value is the use of water. I think it's an architecture that is very romantic, an architecture about feelings, about emotion. We were talking that it's a five-sense architecture. I mean, in the morning with Shaykham, that you hear the noise of water, you have the smells. So water is certainly an element. You see again in Islamic, in Mexico, and in contemporary. And we feel that it's a beautiful element to work around. It's an element that connects you with nature, and that it gives you a special feeling in the architecture. It doesn't have to be dealt like in very large volumes of water. I mean, a lot of times, because coming from the desert, this water is treated more as a treasure. So you can make a little fountain and then makes the whole difference in a space. You know? And how we have been playing around with different ways of treating water, even when we have done swimming pools become more like a fountain, more than like a swimming area. The use of roofs, I think that the nights are beautiful. For example, we were last night here and the climate is very nice, and because you are using flat roofs most of the time, the opportunity of using the ceiling and the terraces, which we think is also very Islamic and can be incorporated in the architecture. For example, this is a house we did in the Pacific Ocean in Mexico, where are different pavilions, and all the roofs of the pavilions, you can use them as terraces. In one of them we put the hammocks, in the other one we put the pool. So really you end up using all the roofs in this kind of architecture. The use of geometry, I think that geometry is a beautiful and it's a fascinating element in the Islamic world, and I don't see any reason why don't we can keep playing with geometry in a contemporary way. No? The use of patterns, of geometrical patterns. No? You see the Islamic, and even in Mexico we had that tradition with the pre-Hispanic geometrical patterns, as you see in the center, and there was kind of a mix between the pre-Hispanic and the Islamic, and came out some beautiful pattern designs in Mexico. Some of the contemporary artists, some of them that actually work here also in Educational City, have been working around this idea of using geometry. Like, for example, the fountain that is full of pyramids that we work with Vicente Rojo, a Mexican artist. And I think that intuitively, a lot of the contemporary artists have been working in Mexico around the geometric patterns. The use of tiles, which is a tradition that we also inherited from the Islamic world. I believe that actually in Mexico is one of the few places that we keep producing the tiles in the traditional way, and we incorporate, for example, in a museum in the right image, there was a children's museum in Mexico City. The use of light and shadow, which is very particular of this climate. I think a lot has to do with the quality of light. I think coming from a similar latitude, I mean, the contrast between light and shadow is very sharp, and that, of course, brings another element to architecture. These are some more vernacular almost screens that have been done in Mexico, and you see very strong the relationship, and how playing with light, I think, in architecture can really make a difference when you are working in this kind of climate and this kind of latitude. Some of projects, for example, the two in the right are the ones in the American University in Cairo, that the beautiful is that the light keeps changing during the day and makes the space very different. Or the light, that it's not only for functional aspects, but it's also like an element of design and to create a special emotion, like the special chapel that we did. And then another element that it may be a little different in Mexico is the use of color. Color is present in Islamic architecture, as you can see in the picture in Morocco. Maybe in Mexico, we used to say that we are more irresponsible with the use of color. So you see more color, but I think it's also part of this character of living in a place with a strong light, and we see color as an emotional part to create a surprise and an interesting element. So above all, I think we are talking about an architecture that is around the human being, an architecture that is around emotions. I mean, it's an architecture that has mystery. I think you see a lot of examples that you go through a little corridor, and suddenly you discover a beautiful courtyard that you didn't expect. So that mystery, I think, comes very much into this tradition, and I think we shouldn't lose it. For example, the idea of entering a house between a series of walls that you see in the image in the left, that you intentionally hit the door and then you discover the main courtyard of the house. It's also very romantic architecture. I don't know exactly how to describe why it's romantic, but I think it's an architecture that you want to spend an afternoon, to have a nice lunch, a nice dinner, that brings out the emotions. So after all, I think we should look for an architecture that really moves your feeling and moves your emotions. That doesn't mean that we have to go traditionally, but that I think that's some of the values that we try to take from Islamic architecture, and that we considering and during the studies when we were doing Educational City. We were fortunate to work in 4 buildings. The first one was the Texas A&M, so it was the School of Engineering. As a School of Engineering, they wanted like a very easy to read building with a very geometrical plan. There were 2 components. One was the teaching facility, and the other one was the research facilities. So we did the 2 shapes. The first one, it was around 4 courtyards, which was living more to the indoors, and the research facility that was the negative of the other one was living to the outside. That idea of the geometry of the plan became part of the symbol that we used in some of the screens, in some of the facade. And of course, we're trying to play with these geometrical forms and trying to create these interior spaces but making them in a contemporary way. Of course, the sun protection is an element that we think is an opportunity as an architectural design. For example, this facade was west facing, so we developed these walls trying to protect from the west. And to try to have the students living towards interior courtyards and interior spaces with water. And also we had a discussion about color, and we wanted to have the color more in the interior spaces. We thought that for the master plan, it was better that outside we have more stone and more subtle colors and materials, and that the color became more a surprise in some of the spaces inside the building, like this courtyard that it was in the research space in the engineering school. After the Texas A&M, we were involving the Carnegie Mellon, the School of Business and Computer. In this case, we had the central spine that was connecting the 2 sides of the campus. So part of the program was to keep that spine that crossed through the building. We did the building semicircular in one side and the other building in the other one. And that permitted us creating 2 atrium spaces in the quarter of the circles that were created, and again, creating these interior spaces where the usable spaces were used. So it's more an architecture that it's more about the volume that you carved, a volume that is solid because, for example, I had the couple of visits in late July, and everybody told me about the sandstorms, but only when you leave one, you realize how hard the climate can be here, and you understand why the buildings have to live to the inside in some of the times. So that's the reason to decide that we decide to make like very solid walls that became very sculptural, and then carve in those walls and start doing the inside spaces. Where also we began to develop the spaces between Texas A&M and Carnegie Mellon. So we developed like a landscape plaza, some connections, so that each of the buildings had its own character, but at the same time they looked well together. They had the same scale, and some elements that linked them, like the use of the same stone and the same height that was established in the master plan. The drop-off of the VIP entrance, this was the connection with Texas A&M, that again we were having the main entrance with the spine, but we believed that it was good to have a connection with the other school, and we think this is one of the things that educational cities should. I'm glad to hear that they are working on that net that is going to connect the different universities. I think the education in the future has to be multidisciplinary, and we have to learn a lot from the other faculties, and I think that's very important to encourage that. We began to create these spaces, filtering the light, again being protected from the exterior. This is the main spine that by bringing the stone from the outside, we wanted to believe to be perceived as an outdoor street, like a space that is public, that doesn't belong only to the Carnegie Mellon community. In that place, we work with Pilar Clement, which is one of the leading Mexican artists. So she began to do also some research on the geometrical patterns in the Islamic culture, and she developed all these facades around the geometrical patterns, but with a modern interpretation. And I think what's interesting was that it was not a piece of art that you buy and then you hang it on the wall, but it was more an integral part of the building. I think it's a thing that we are losing more and more, is to incorporate artists as part of the design team and not only as an afterthought. One of the atriums where we did different steps and we put the Mahilis areas. I was happy to hear yesterday that a lot of the students are using this area a lot, that is very popular. And you can take out all the cushions and then put seating, and can also be used as a conference center or an auditorium. So I think that idea of having like a plaza that you use it for several uses is very important. In the other atrium, we located the cafeteria, again trying to use the use of water, the use of landscape, a different color, how to filter the light, and a lot of the elements that I showed you before, we try to apply it in the projects here. The student center, which is the building we are right now, which in this case it was a building that was used by all the different universities. So we took the inspiration of the traditional souk. We believe that this should be the souk of the educational city. It's where you have the main food facilities, some of the athletic facilities, the meeting rooms, the student organizations, the game room. So it was the idea of having different entrances and to have a building that was more complex, that had a series of streets, that you can even get lost in between the streets. So it's which we think is the idea of the souk. We develop as a typical roof of all these streets, these kind of umbrellas, And by bringing them to the outside was the symbolism of showing the different entrances. Again, the how to work with the light, with a very strong light and sun condition that you have. I think with all the architects that have been working here, you see the different possibilities of sun protection, and I think it's endless, the different options that you can look for the sun protection, and it's a unique element that is fascinating for this working in this climate. Again, playing with the umbrellas, showing the different accesses to the student center. And then in the center, the program demanded for a meditation room or a meditation courtyard. So we worked together with Jan Hendricks. It's an artist a Dutch artist that has been living in Mexico for many years. So we worked together with him. He did all this design, which has a similar idea of, for example, that you can see in the ceremonial court, but this is more organic, more around the tree branches. And we thought there wasn't a space where you can get out and rest or read a book or be a little bit more calm. The umbrellas, they mark all the different circulations, the public areas like the main dining room. We look for different places to sit down. We think that and to get together between the students. We believe that a lot of the educational life should be about creating these spaces where students can meet between them, can meet between the teachers. I think knowledge, you can always get it in the internet or in a book, but coming to a campus, I think it's about interaction, and we need to look for places or excuses to have this interaction. The game room, and again, this idea of using the geometry, of using tile, of using different patterns, that you don't have to go traditional. We think that to be Islamic or to belong to this kind of architecture, when you can explore different options. The vestibule that we are outside here, that it's a double height space with a lamp, so we see the artificial light also, and not only as an element that you need, but also as an element of design, as something that can be something interesting in architecture. And then the last building was the Georgetown University. I think what was also very interesting working with these different universities is that each of the buildings had to represent the modern campus. So we went to see each of the universities, have talked with each of the teachers. Each one has its own different philosophy of how to teach. So at the end, the building, we wanted to represent the modern institution. At the same time, it had to represent educational city. For example, in Georgetown, they didn't want to have a formal building, which was very different from Texas A&M. The inspiration was more to have like a village. So someone was telling me that he always gets that every time he gets into this building, he gets lost. I was happy to hear that, because that was completely the intention, that to have this village with different plazas, different courtyards, and different places, and then have a central plaza, which is the main atrium where everybody meets. Again, the connection with the Oxygen Park, when we did the building, it was not finished. I was very happy to see it finished yesterday. So you have a main entrance from the park, and another entrance from by car in the north. This is the ceremonial entrance, which in Georgetown was very important, because they receive a lot of dignitaries, and being an international affairs university, I mean, it's very common that they receive politicians to talk, and they wanted to have like a very important entrance by car. Again, the use of water, as you get into the ceremonial entrance court, that you have this element of water when you get down. And the use of the screens in different ways. No? This is the dean's office. that we wanted to do in a very symbolic window in one of the corners. And again, when you play around courtyards, I mean, it's endless, the possibilities, the use of water, again, as a precious element, because it's a place where water is scarce, but I think that's why it's sometimes it's important to use it and to value it as an important element. The VIP courtyard that you have, the use of a more intimate courtyard in a different scale. We think that each courtyard can respond to the different use and to the different scale. The library, which we have, of course, the great library by Rem Koolhaas that next door, but this was like a specific library for Georgetown, and it wanted to be like a place to study, a place that it was more for to be quiet and to be able to work as a team, and a very flexible space. We played again with another type of roof to bring indirect light from the ceiling. And the main atrium space, which is again the equivalent of the plaza in this village that Georgetown was referring to. It's a multi-purpose space. They can move the chairs around and make an event. In the opening, it was a big dinner in that place. So it can be a multi-purpose space. In this case, we work with Ricardo Regazzoni, which is another good Mexican artist. He developed this kind of light coming from the roof. So it became like a symbol of light coming from the skylights, which we thought are very beautiful. Then the other project we did in Qatar, which is a very small project, but it was very interesting, was the interior design for the boutique hotel in the Souk Al Najada. It was a challenge how to work around the existing structure. And we were surprised when we look at the plan. It was 3 houses. So we found the houses, all the structure was already done. So we work around the different rooms. Each room had a different shape, a different angle. So it was very, very interesting to work around the structure and how to create a boutique hotel that was a surprise to us, how the really small spaces can bring a lot of light. We brought like another Mexican artist, for example, to develop these niches and do some artists. We developed some of the fountains, the furniture inside. So it was a great experience to work in a smaller scale than the large buildings we have done in Educational City, and how you can understand the Islamic architecture when you work around these traditional buildings. So this is about what I want to say, and I'll be happy to.